right, so we have these different kinds of breathing, but for the most part, when you're sitting quietly and breathing, it's going to be tidal, what we would call tidal volume. So it's just the fluctuation pushing down of your diaphragm when you contract it, which is filling your lungs. You're exchanging about 500 milliliters of air unless you're breathing hard. And so we can say, well, what is the volume of air that you are changing per minute? And so that would be what we call the minute ventilation rate. And this is, as I said, the volume of air that is exchanged per minute while breathing shallowly. And we had said that's tidal volume. And from our previous video and slide, we had seen that that's around 500 milliliters. So if we take that number, 500 milliliters, and we multiply it times the respiratory rate. And the respiratory rate is the number of breaths that you take per minute. And if we take an example of 12, sort of an average number, an average volume and an average number, a minute ventilation rate of about 6 liters or 6,000 milliliters is fairly typical. Now, in the last slide, the final point that I was talking about had to do with the residual volume. And we had said the residual volume is the air that can never be exchanged, but it's in portions of your lung where you don't have diffusion. So we had said that simple diffusion moves oxygen from the alveoli and the quaternary or respiratory bronchioles into the capillaries. And the reason this is possible is because of all it has to do is cross 2 layers of simple squamous epithelium. It's a very flattened type of cell that makes up the wall, type 1 cells, in the alveoli or in the respiratory bronchioles. And then there's that similar type of cell that makes up the walls of the capillary. And so this is what oxygen diffuses across, and CO2 comes the other direction. So when we think about these ventilations and this movement of air, we can say probably a more meaningful measure would be how much of the air makes it to the locations where we have gas exchange. And so we have another measurement or another type of calculation we can do, and that is called alveolar ventilation rate. And so the alveolar ventilation rate is the rate per minute of the amount of oxygen that makes it to the alveoli and the physiological, the respiratory bronchioles, the amount of air that makes it to these surfaces. And so if we do that, if we say we're exchanging 500 milliliters of air, but some of it is not making it to the alveoli, and so we have to subtract that. So if we take our 500 milliliter number and we say, well, about 30% of it is in the non-respiratory portions of the respiratory tree. This is in the trachea, and those bronchi and bronchioles that are cartilaginous. So if we subtract 150 milliliters from that 500 milliliters, that leaves us 350 milliliters of air with every breath that is making its way to the respiratory surfaces. And so if we again take our sort of average respiratory rate of 12 and we multiply it times that 350 milliliters, we can say the alveolar ventilation rate for this individual here would not be 6,000 milliliters, it would be 4,200 milliliters. Okay?